Hey, what's happening? My name is D, and welcome back to another episode of Book Reviews with a Regular Dude. Today, we're going to be talking about Powerless by Lauren Roberts. But before we get into all of that, I got to give a quick shout out to my Plus Ultra Don't Fretters, my top tier supporters on Patreon, JJ Valdez, Luba Brock, and Laughing Cat Dog. Thank you so much for your support. You are helping to ensure I'm able to keep creating content and put it out as frequently as possible. If you also want to help out the channel in a major way, as well as gain access to exclusive content you won't ever find on YouTube, make sure you consider subscribing to my Patreon. If not, no worries, but please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. All right, now let's talk about Powerless. Powerless is a young adult fantasy romance. I think it came out couple years ago, last year. It is the first in the Powerless trilogy, and it's pretty popular. I don't really get why. I've heard it be compared to like Light Lark, which I do. I don't necessarily agree. Like I can see why someone would make that comparison, but I personally wouldn't. But yeah, going into reading this book, I didn't really have high expectations just based off of what I've heard from friends. One of my patrons had buddy read this with someone else, and she really did not enjoy it, despite what some of my hate watchers might believe. I don't go into reading any book wanting to dislike it, and I do want to see if there's something about it that I can enjoy. I didn't find anything in this book, and that's a darn shame. But yeah, going in, I didn't really have high expectations. I'm gonna read the premise, then I'm gonna get into the plot, like what happens in the books, read through the notes that I took while I was reading. Then I'll do my, I think analysis is a pretty generous term for what I do here, but I'm gonna do that after. She is the very thing he spent his whole life hunting. He is the very thing she spent her whole life pretending to be. Only the extraordinary belong in the kingdom of Ilya, the exceptional, the empowered, the elites, with a capital E. The powers these elites have possessed for decades were graciously gifted to them by the plague, though not all were fortunate enough to both survive the sickness and reap the reward. Those born ordinary are just that, ordinary. And when the king decreed that all ordinaries be banished in order to preserve his elite society, lacking an ability suddenly became a crime, making Peyton Gray a felon by fate and a thief by necessity. Surviving in the slums as an ordinary is no simple task, and Peyton knows this better than most, having been trained by her father to be overly observant since she was a child. Peyton poses as a psychic in the crowded city, blending in with the elites as best she can in order to stay alive and out of trouble. Easier said than done. When Peyton unsuspectingly saves one of Ilya's princes, she finds herself thrown into the purging trials. The brutal competition exists to showcase the elite's powers, the very thing Peyton lacks. If the trials and the opponents within them don't kill her, the prince she's fighting feelings for certainly will if he discovers that she is completely ordinary. I'm not going to lie, that premise makes the book sound a lot better than I found it to be. Again, like if you really enjoyed this book or whatever, that's dope. I just didn't. Chapter 1 is from Peyton's POV. We're right into a fighting/sparring scene. Apparently, the FMC's opponent is The Flash. Nope, never mind. The blood was honey from sticky buns. I guess she's trying to avoid being caught sneaking out. I don't know what's going on. That's true. Like, right off the jump, like, basically, it starts off like you're in the middle of action, but Peyton has just knocked out a royal guard as she's like stolen some stuff. But I was so confused as to what was going on. Like for the first like little bit of reading this thing, I was just like, what is happening? I'm so confused. I've said it before. I said it pretty recently on one of my videos from my patrons, but I've said it before. The first 50 pages of any fantasy book, I think, are kind of nonsense as you get a lay of the land, like literally, as well as an understanding of how the society functions. If the people have powers, how does that work? Some other books do a better job of either easing the reader into the world, or if they are throwing you into the world, they build that world pretty seamlessly and pretty efficiently. And this doesn't really do that. And also, Peyton, in the beginning of the book, thinks that she's bleeding. Because she feels like honey dripping down her shoulder or something like that. Personally, I've never like felt something wet on my shoulder and be like, oh, I must be bleeding right away. And you know, maybe not now, but back in the day, I lived a rough enough life that that was possible. But, and then there's this note, the author writes as if the character has no agency, like it's first person narration, but the character narrates as if it's third. The example that comes to mind isn't Payton's perspective, but a lot of the narration is like, my eyes flit around the room. And it's very jarring, and it's very, it just makes it seem like the characters don't have control of their actions, and it's just not how people usually talk. It doesn't feel very natural to me. I scanned the room. I looked around the room. Makes a little bit more sense, but this sort of trying to do poetic fantasy prose that's usually done in the third person, but you're doing it in the first person, is very jarring to me. There was a plague that gave survivors superpowers. The strong became stronger, the fast became faster, but some people were ordinary and they became the oppressed class. That bit was like the strong became stronger, the fast became faster, the darker ones became one with the shadows or something. I was like, that's so corny. And one of the things I don't really get is that they don't really attribute it to magic. Like, clearly these are magic powers, but they kind of treat it like it's sort of an X-Men mutation type thing. And I have this problem with X-Men as well. Like, I grew up watching those movies, and I had some time to think about it, but it's like, you know, it's like all these powers come from one source, the X gene, but they come out really bizarre and strange. And like, I feel like if the powers all have one source, like in this case, the plague, I think that the powers would be more similar. You know what I mean? Like, there's this anime called Fire Force. You know, it's not my favorite because I think the characterization's really shallow. It's really cool. There's really good fights and like sound design and stuff like that, but the characterization is so, it's almost annoying because all the characters are one note, but all the characters have like fire powers. And so there's this like sense of consistency. There isn't that with this. And that doesn't necessarily bother me. You know what I'm saying? Like, this is not a big deal, but it is weird how it's like, how did just the physically strong become super strong, and what made that decision? And like, what qualities did different people have where they get these abilities and stuff like, I don't know. It seemed like a very hand wavy way to explain how people got magic powers. Pretty early on in me having a Patreon, me and some patrons were doing a live stream kind of thing, and we were talking about how we thought it was weird that in a lot of YA fantasy, the people with magic powers are the ones who are oppressed, and the people without powers are the colonizers or the oppressors. And so it's kind of refreshing that we have that common cliche flipped on its head. I just wish that it was in a book that put a little bit more thought into how the powers came together and how the powers are named. I'll get into it a little bit later, but yeah, like, people who have super strength are called a brawny and stuff like that. And I understand it. It just sounds kind of silly. Chapter 2 is from Kai's perspective. I wrote half-brother Prince and his brother Train, which doesn't make any sense, and that's just bad note-taking. But like, Kai and his brother are half-brothers, and they're training together. Kai will be an enforcer, and his brother Kit will be the king. Kai can steal powers, and there's an older black-coated character that is sort of a mammy Aunt Jemima stereotype. You know, these notes are brutal. Yeah, so they're training, and they're just kind of goofing around. It's just like introducing Kai and his brother and who they are. And then they go and they like go into the kitchen and steal some like treats or whatever. And there's this older black lady. I forget her name, but she is 100% just like a mammy stereotype. And I found that really annoying. And she's the only character that is characterized in this way and speaks differently from every other character. There are other characters that are described as like not white or whatever, but this older black woman is the only one who's like, "Child, what you doing here?" And I just found that really annoying and kind of offensive. Chapter 3, Payton pickpockets a guy and finds a secret note for a secret meeting at her childhood home. Chapter 4, Payton pickpockets a very handsome stranger, who's probably Kai, dressed in black with a coin purse dangling at his side. She's like, He must be very confident to walk around with loot carrying so much, well, loot. And I swear the author named the town that Payton's from just so she could make that joke. He has eyes the color of thunderclouds. I think whenever a YA fantasy romantasy character has really distinctive features like eyes the color of thunderclouds or eyes the color of the ocean or whatever, we will find like every gray thing or blue thing or green thing that happens in nature. Every time this character is like described or like their eyes are being described for whatever reason, it's something like that. And I it's fine. I just think it can be really heavy-handed and it gets to be a bit much. Like, I understand, like we get it. He's got gray eyes. You don't have to keep saying storm clouds or silver moon or whatever. And again, I get that it's meant to like make the book seem prettier, more poetic, maybe deeper, whatever. I just think that there are moments where it makes sense to appreciate, find the beauty in, and spit poetry about the way somebody looks. And there's other moments where I'm like, y'all about to die. Like, we got bigger things to worry about than the color of somebody's eyes. I'm sorry. Maybe I'm just not romantic. Chapter 5, Kai. Kai's father, the king, gives him an assassination mission. He needs to kill a family because they adopted a girl without powers. He just exiles them to the desert and calls it mercy. I think there's an attempt here to make Kai seem morally complex or whatever, but I think the fact that he like is aware that he's not being merciful, but he calls it mercy, doesn't make a ton of sense to me. And also, like, throughout the book, they call Kai the future enforcer, like the future enforcer, but there is no current enforcer. And like, I guess the king's brother's dead or something, like, why is uncle not training him to be an enforcer? It feels almost like this is a job that was made up by the king for his son, but I don't know. I didn't get super hung up on it, but I did think it was pretty strange. Chapter 6, Kai's perspective. We redo the scene of Payton pickpocketing him. Why? And like, if you rephrase it and you summarize it, because we just read it like a chapter or two ago, that's fine. But this was almost like word for word. We went through the same banter conversation thing, and I just found that really, like, I found it like a waste of time. And then I noticed, how did you not notice this? Aren't you supposed to be super observant? That's like the only thing we know about you. Also, their waist, her waist bit, and describing her how hot Payton is cringy. And maybe non-binary erasure. In this world, there are no characters that are non-binary. I don't think nobody uses like they, them pronouns. But it was just really interesting how he's like, their waist. I put my hand on their waist to steady them. Her waist, and it's like, whoa, like, oh, whoa, this is a lady. Oh wow, she's got such a waist. Oh wow. Thought that was just really strange, and I was like, this guy's kind of creepy. But a lot of YA protagonist love interests are creepy. That's like part of the deal. Chapter 7, she sees Kai getting ambushed by the silencer. That's what they call people who can like shut down powers. She swoops in to help. He confronts Payton and she convinces him that she convinces him that she's a psychic. Payton's ability to Sherlock Holmes everybody is really poorly written, is my note. And yeah. Chapter 8, Payton's perspective. Payton is nicknamed the Silver Savior because this author isn't interested in coming up with creative or catchy names, and she's inexplicably signed up for the purging trials. I don't know if it was ever explained who signed her up. It might have been the king. I don't know. I don't remember. Yeah, that happens because we got to get her in close proximity to Kai, and we got to get her in a dangerous situation or whatever. Chapter 9, Kai. Kai tortures the silencer and gets nothing, and then he reports to his father. It's the resistance. We need to get rid of this little Resistance, says the king. Wow, this prose is exquisite. Why is Kai the future enforcer but doing the job of the enforcer and there's no current enforcer? Kai finds out his younger adoptive brother is in the trials and so is Payton, which is weird because you would have thought it was him who signed her up. I really did think that for a little bit. I don't know, just thought maybe that would be him trying to mess with it. I don't know what I thought, really. I was just like, oh yeah, it's got to be that guy. Chapter 10, Payton gets taken away 2 weeks before the trials. We meet the Malfoy. His name is Ace. Very cartoony. Chapter 11, Payton's perspective. She gets out of the coach and the palace has colors she didn't know existed. Also, the smell of flowers and sunshine. I can't with writing like this because sunshine has no smell. She meets the prince, the older brother, and he's got two. He's hot too. Oh no, whatever shall she do? This author has never spoken to a homeless person. The way this character adjusts to lavish lifestyle is really weird. Like, obviously I don't know this author. I know that she's like pretty young or whatever. What I meant there is that there isn't like really a time where Payton needs to adjust to sleeping on a soft bed. Like, she's just super into it. And I know that for a lot of people who get off the streets, they actually do have a hard time adjusting to like a really soft bed. Sometimes it feels like it's too soft and they need to sleep, they need to work their way into it. And also when you've been surviving on scraps and like basically malnourished, being given like really nutrient dense foods right away can make you really sick. And there just isn't really any attention to that kind of detail. It's just like, oh wow, life is great. And we've talked about it, and I've talked about it before on this channel, where I think that sometimes people read like stories where everything works out for the protagonist and there aren't real stakes because it makes them feel better about their own lives or whatever. I just don't love stories like this where everything's just kind of coming up and the stakes aren't real and the danger doesn't feel real. Feels like it's devoid of humanity a little bit, and that piece of writing just really rubbed me the wrong way for my own personal reasons, my own personal history. Chapters 12 to 13, they train and flirt, I guess. Nothing really happens. I guess in 13, Blair, a character irrelevant and probably detrimental to the plot, cuts Payton's ear to mark her, and Kai braids her hair to keep the blood from getting into it. Chapters 14 to 15, all the contestants do like interviews in a coliseum that's kind of being televised through magic, but again, they haven't explained magic or how it all works. So it's really strange because they've found just a person with the power to compensate for modern technology in some ways, but in other ways there's like indoor plumbing and lights and music and stuff. So I'm just like, when does it end? What's the through line? There isn't one. Pay needs to demonstrate her power in these trials, and she's like, I don't know, what am I gonna do? And she ends up just doing her observation Sherlock Holmes trick and just reads a bunch of stuff off of people, and then everyone's like, wow, she's so impressive, she's so cool. In chapter 16 and 17, there's just more training, and Kai and Payton spar a little bit. And it's just fighting, it is boring. And the reason that the training is boring is because Payton and Kai, who are main characters, have already kind of established that they're like the best fighters. There's a couple other characters that pose like a minor threat. There's no sense of improvement. There's a book that I really enjoy. It's called The Rage of Dragons by Evan Winter. And there's so much training in that book. And it would be boring if the main character, Tao, was good at sword fighting in the beginning. And that's kind of the whole point of the book, is he's training to be the best sword fighter so that he can kill the people who killed his father. And so there's a ton of training in that book, but it's all like getting him from being the worst to the best, or one of the best or something. And the shit that he's willing to put himself through in order to achieve that goal is crazy. The training in Powerless means nothing because there's no improvement. There's no growth that happens with the character, like as far as skill level or even development as people, as they like get to know each other better through fighting. There's just like fighting and sexual tension. So I'm really not feeling it. Chapter 18, Payton's perspective. Kit, Kaya's brother, the prince, asks Peyton to be his date for the first ball because part of the trials is there's multiple balls. In chapter 19, Kai arrives in Peyton's room and drags her for dance lessons. They go to his bedroom and he reads poetry because he's sensitive. No, he's not. That like I get that that's something you'd throw in to be like, wow, this tough guy, this edgy shadow boo is so sensitive because he reads poetry. But it's like, I am a spoken word artist. I've met a lot of misogynistic, emotionally unavailable, toxic guys who also read and write poetry. Reading or writing poetry does not make you a good person. There's a lot of like classic poets that were violent misogynists and horrible racists. Oh, and also at some point, Peyton is told that she's going to need a dress for these balls and she can have a dress made. And so she goes back to the slums to pick up her friend Andina, I think her name is, who's her best friend, the person she lived with when she was in the slums. And Andina becomes Peyton's personal seamstress. Chapters 20 to 21, the ball is really boring, and then it gets bombed. Chapters 22 to 30, they start the trials. The first challenge is to survive in the woods called the Whispers for a week and collect armbands from each other. Peyton almost dies after getting stabbed in the stomach by Ace with a spear. Kai saves her, and they team up and get closer. Just a note, every time they talk about their clothes, they refer to it as thin tank or thin pants, and I get it. The clothes are thin. Yeah, there's a lot of times like that's how clothes are described, and other people are just kind of described with like they're given the one moniker, like the Future Enforcer, my thin tank top or whatever. And it's like, I just don't know if you need to keep doing that. You know what I mean? Like, we all know who Kai's famous in this country. So you don't always have to be like, that's the Future Enforcer. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, during this first trial, like, this is probably the most, like, emotionally intimate Peyton and Kai get with each other, where you learn about, like, both of their tragic backstories, and wow, they're not so different, even though they've been through different things. They're kind of the same things, and they're kindred spirits, and they don't want to kill each other. They don't want to fight, you know? Ooh, so sweet, so tender. I didn't care about any of it. Peyton's origin story feels very cliche in the genre at this point, so, like, there just isn't a lot there for me to care about. And Kai, you know, he's very bland, he's very boring, and he's very, like, he hates himself so much, but he also doesn't express. He's just like, oh, I'm a bad guy. I'm a monster. My father abused me and tortured me to make me strong, and it is what it is. And I'm just like, okay, well, if you don't care, why should I? You know what I'm saying? Chapter 31, Kai, it's the end of the first trial, and they all fight. Ace, who can cast illusions, that's his power. He tricks Kai into almost killing his adoptive brother. It wasn't shocking because that kid was obviously going to die from the jump. Chapter 32, never mind, Kai gets close enough to a healer to save little bro, so the stakes really don't matter. Yeah, I thought the little brother was going to die, and I was like, okay, cool, like, you're willing to play hardball, that's dope. And then, nah, never mind. In chapter 33, nothing really happens. Peyton kind of flirts with Kit a little bit, and maybe she can change him. And then in my notes, I have the smiling with the hearts around the head emoji and the twinkle emoji. So I was being sarcastic, but yeah, she really thinks that maybe she can get Kit to change his ways and she can change society by making him a nicer person, which is a really sweet, adorable idea. You can't make people change through romantic love, especially not with like oppressive systems and stuff like that. Like, that was one of my biggest critiques of the Dreamland Billionaires series that I've done so far. I'm not doing the third one. You can't make me. But there's this idea that romantic love can make these super corrupt, emotionally unavailable, manipulative billionaires into like good people. And that's like just not how it works. I've met a few men in my life, men in my family and stuff, who like refuse to change their points of view on things like misogyny or patriarchy or racism, even though their partners are women or women of color or whatever. It just doesn't happen that way. In chapter 34, Peyton finds the resistance. A guard she knows is there, and it turns out that her dad was a founding member of the resistance, and they want her help so they can kidnap the king and reveal who they are. It's a bad plan, but Peyton joins. Chapter 35, there's more training, and Kai and Peyton have an archery contest. In chapter 36, the king tells Peyton not to talk to his sons anymore because he knows exactly who she is, and he killed her dad. In chapter 37, there's another ball. Peyton dances with Kit, and Kai gets really drunk. And then he comes on to Peyton, and they dance. Peyton has a panic attack, and Kai unlaces her dress to help her breathe. Chapter 38, Kit and Kai drink together. Chapter 39, there's an impromptu brawl, and Peyton fights Blair, and then it's over. Like, it's just a weird fighting match or whatever. Chapters 40 to 44, the second trial is to climb up a mountain as a team. And then when they get to the top, they have a free-for-all fight for the flag that's there. Kai kills Ace and Peyton wins the challenge, and the king is mad. Chapters 45 to 47, Peyton guilts Kit, and then he asks her to take him to the slums. He shows her the tunnels the resistance want her to find so that they can, like, do their plan, and she tells them where it is. You know, things are moving forward. 48 to 49, Kai has a nightmare about people he's killed. Peyton heard him scream in the night she comes to his room. He almost kills her, and then they sleep together, but not like get down. I mean, they actually sleep. Chapter 50, there's a third ball. Chapter 51 to 52, Peyton steals Kit's keys to the tunnel at the ball. Kai dances with her and does the whole, like, what are we speech. Chapter 53, they almost kiss, but then the king sends a guard to stop them from kissing. And then chapter 54 until the end, the final trial is a maze, and at the center there's a criminal who deserves to die. It turns out that it's Peyton's Bessie and Dina. I don't even know if that's her actual name. I just made that up. Andy. And then the resistance strikes. Kit knows it's Peyton who betrayed them. Peyton tries to escape, and the king faces her. So they fight, and then before Peyton kills the king, he reveals that he wasn't the one who killed her father. It was actually Kai, and it was his first kill, so it's so poetic. And that's why Kai's always felt so familiar to her, because she remembers his face from when she killed his dad, when he killed her dad. Kai sees her kill the king, who's his father, and, you know, whatever feelings he may have, that's still his fucking dad, right? So he tells her to run, but the next time he will bring her to justice. This is from Kit's perspective, and it's just like, he's the king now, and the kind, caring Kit is gone. He's dark and edgy. He's a bad boy now. And he's like, I always knew I was going to rule over my brother, and now it's whatever. I kind of like him calling me Majesty, and go get that lady. And that's the end of the book. Okay, now I'll do the analysis. Let's start with the characters. Starting with Peyton. Peyton's only kind of defining characteristics are that she's like tough and she's a thief. She is, in my mind, just a very kind of prototypical edgy YA protagonist who isn't like other girls. Her motivations are pretty thin and uncomplicated, and even though she's so observant that she can pass herself off as a psychic, she makes like really bad decisions and doesn't really strategize well, which I think is, it doesn't quite add up with what we're told about this character and what she like demonstrates. You know what I'm saying? It's kind of like in Lightlark, we're told that Isla Crown is incredibly intelligent, but we don't see it on page, really. We're just told that. And in the same way, I think that Peyton is just, yeah, she's just all edges, and there isn't a lot of substance to her character. Isn't like any nuance or depth, really. I would say that she's a little bit more interesting than Kai. Kai's super boring. He's just like, oh, I'm the bad boy. I'm so edgy. I think the author's intention was to characterize him as somebody who's very withdrawn and has his walls up to protect his own heart, his own mind from the atrocities that he's committed. But in doing so, he just feels really, he's so flat and wooden, he's like a hardwood floor, you know what I'm saying? And Kai is so self-aware, like he knows exactly what's going on in his mind, but he's still seems to make all of his decisions based off of his emotions, which doesn't make a lot of sense. Like for somebody who's supposed to be very cold and calculating, he makes his decisions with his libido in mind a lot of the time, and just moves from a very emotional place. And I think the other thing that really throws me about his character is that he seems very proud of his violent tendencies, the people that he's killed, his propensity for violence. But we're also supposed to kind of like see this guy as like he's sensitive and he's soft and he's sweet and he's worthy of love because he's so hot. And I'm never really vibed with morally gray characters like this, because they seem almost like, it's like the book tries to tell us to feel sorry for these characters, and the text doesn't condemn any of these horrific actions that they've committed. Especially in the case of Kit, he is the oppressor. He is committing these acts of violence against the oppressed. Then we're supposed to kind of turn around and see him as sympathetic. And I don't know, I just don't feel bad for a colonizer, you know? Like, I think in some ways it's kind of also a colonizer romance, just like To Gaze Upon Wicked Gods. Kit is barely a character. I thought he's kind of supposed to be another love interest, but nothing really happens there. In the end, when he's like, I'm not kind anymore, the kind Kit is gone or whatever, I was just like, okay, whatever, you're so corny and cringy. Every other character just exists to further the plot, either to serve as a minor antagonist or to be put in harm's way to further the plot of the protagonists. King, who is the villain in the book, his motivations are not fleshed out at all. He just seems cartoonishly evil and super into eugenics, but there's like nothing to him. It's just, we needed a bad guy. We needed a corrupt king, so let's do that. There's no like moments where he's humanized or even made three-dimensional. Like, they mention that he loves his wife, but we don't see that. He and Kit had a good relationship, but we don't see that. We don't see any of it, you know? We just see he's a bad guy in every scene that we see him in. You know, I'm not a big fan of like villains who are just broken heroes. That can be good and that can be executed really well. I just feel like we have too much of that in media right now. You have too much of like, because the villains are hot, we got to make them like sympathetic so that people aren't canceled for making thirst trap edits of them or something. So I do enjoy a villain who's just villainous for the sake of it, but then they got to be better written than this. And I still think that they need to be convinced of their convictions. And I'm just not getting that from this book or from this character. I'm really not getting this from this book, though. I don't think any of the characters really have convictions. Peyton probably does, but I think that she's just so kind of quick-tempered and preachy that I like miss it a lot, you know? Moving on to world building, the politics in this world, like it's a monarchy, but that's the only part of it that makes sense. The king really wants to have a powerful elite society, but they don't really seem to have a military, which led me to wonder if like there are powerful nations, so it's just like random citizens have superpowers, so no other nation's going to attack them or something, or what's the economic benefit of everyone having magic powers, especially if there's no military or you're not training soldiers to be sold to other nations or something like that. Because you're such a superpower, does everyone give you stuff? I don't know. Like, it's not really thought out or fleshed out. And I guess it doesn't matter to the plot, but it makes the world feel really shallow. Like everything's just happening. It's like a painted backdrop of a play instead of like a world that you're in. I also don't fully understand how this plague is supposed to have given people random superpowers, some of which don't really make sense, like how a virus could affect your body to the point where you can turn into animals, but your hair color is kind of the same, like Beast Boy from Teen Titans, or you can blink in and out of reality or cast illusions or whatever. Some of those superpowers, like super speed, super strength, I kind of was like, okay, I guess. But other ones, it was like, this just seems like a hand-wavy excuse to give everyone magical powers. And at that point, it's like, why not just have like a magical source that blessed some and not others? I feel like that would have made more sense. Like a deity or some kind of like star that fell from the sky, like in the Renegade series. I think that's how they all got their superpowers. And there's so many different powers that there were times where I didn't really get why we were calling them a blank, like a blink, a shifter, or brawny. I hated brawny, or a flash. And I just think that just describing the power was enough, especially since there were so many different ones. I think you almost save word counts by by being like, oh yeah, I like this person has the power to do this or whatever. And something that was really interesting was like, and when I say interesting, that's being generous, but something that caught my attention was Kai, who can borrow other people's powers if he's in a certain proximity to them, can tell what everyone's power is just by feeling alone. And I don't fully understand that, In a past video, I don't remember what one, obviously, I mentioned how the author V.E. Schwab is pretty good at describing what powers feel like, like in Vicious, Victor Vale's power of controlling pain is kind of referred to as like turning up a dial, and Sydney's power is like connecting threads. And same with another character from, I think, City of Goats. It's like finding a thread or something. And there isn't really any of this. It's like I can feel this power tingling or itching at me or whatever, but I just don't understand how he automatically knows what every single power is. And the fact that he's immediately able to use whatever power as good as or better than other people's didn't make a ton of sense to me. I think it's an interesting, unique ability to give a main character, for sure. I just don't fully get how he automatically knows, and I just don't think it was really thought out. I don't really get what the purging trials are for. Like, they say it's to commemorate when the plagues wiped out a bunch of people and gave other people powers. But there's like, yeah, it's really important this time because the enforcer is going to be part of it. The future enforcer, sorry. And I'm like, okay, but like, what's the point? If he's already doing enforcement, why call him the future enforcer? He's just the enforcer. Because there's no current enforcer, it's him. So he might as well just be that. And even if you still want to say like he's the future enforcer because he only becomes the true enforcer when Kit becomes the king, why is his job to win this trial? He already has the job lined up. It's like guaranteed. What the fuck? And what happened to the past enforcer? That was never explained, but I guess it's a plot thing. And this is not a world you would want to be in. It does kind of feel like an anime or an isekai. I don't mean that in a good way. I just mean like everyone has like weird colored hair. So that just stuck out to me. But yeah, moving on to plot, I think to say that there is no plot would be unfair. There is most certainly a plot. It is pretty thin, though. You could miss it if you don't pay attention. The stakes are very low. Like, they tell you it's dangerous or whatever, but because no character that's been characterized is put in any real harm, I don't feel that tension. I don't feel those stakes. Like, no one gets a scar from this plot that matters. You know what I mean? I know that Andina dies. I know that Jax gets a throwing star to the chest. Jax gets healed, and Dina was never, like, and Dina was set up for that from the jump. I had the same kind of problem with Fourth Wing, where it's like all these characters are dying left, right, and center. I say all these. There's like a few characters that die left, right, and center, but we don't spend any time with them, so it's like, why would I care? There's a lot of balls in this plot, and I feel like the only reason that there's balls in this plot is to talk about the dresses that Payton's gonna wear, and to try to have some romantic moments, and that feels very Lightlark. That feels very Caraval. Stephanie Garber's prose is a little bit more Pretty Purple. This tries to do that, but the thing that really bugged me about the writing, because I guess I'm talking about the writing now, is that the dialogue feels really modern in a setting that doesn't reflect that. Like, the technology doesn't make any sense here, but they talk like characters from a 90s sitcom, kind of. Almost cringier than that, though. It's very clunky. It's very rough. It doesn't feel natural, like, ever. And the narration style, again, it's like it's active present tense in the first person. And it makes it feel like the characters are watching the story unfold, which makes me feel even more removed from the story than I already do, because the story doesn't make a ton of sense. It's got a bunch of plot holes, and it's just not interesting because there's so much training and so much balls. At the end, I think I gave this like 1.75 stars. I could maybe give it a 2, but no higher than that. This book has a lot of style, not a lot of substance. I think that there's some interesting ideas here, and I just feel like a more experienced writer, like this writer with more experience, could probably revisit this world and tell something a little bit cooler. Maybe retcon out the terms for people with powers or something. But yeah, this just was not for me, and I really didn't enjoy it. But, you know, if you really did, that's awesome. I'm really happy for you. I would say like a fourth wing is a Little Caesars pizza. This one's like a Papa John's. Every time I've had Papa John's, I've gotten sick. Thank you so much for watching this video. Thank you to my super duper don't fretters, Desi, Lauren, Cassie, and Oliver. You are helping to ensure I'm able to keep creating content and put it out as frequently as possible. If you also want to help out the channel in a major way, as well as gain access to exclusive content you won't find anywhere else, make sure you consider subscribing to my Patreon. There you get an extra rant review video from me once per month, as well as access to my private Discord server where you can chat with me, a bunch of other really lovely club members. We also do a book club once per month where we read a book and then we meet on Zoom and we talk about it. It's a really good time. So if any of that sounds interesting or exciting to you, make sure you consider subscribing to my Patreon. And if not, no worries, but please, before you go, from me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. Thank you again so much for watching. My name is D. Don't fret. I'll see you next time. Peace out.